So with Namada, we just like went the full 9 yards. Everything is run by the community. There's no centralized infrastructure. The entire thing, it was a fully decentralized launch. It's very cool as a result.
Welcome to the Staking Insider podcast, where we explore the frontiers of staking with guests from leading protocols in the space. I'm Mirko, CEO and co-founder of Staking Rewards, and today we are pleased to welcome Adrian Brink, co-founder of Anoma and Namada, for a discussion. Anoma is a distributed operating system for intent-centric applications, and Namada is a privacy-centric layer 1 blockchain developed by the Anoma Foundation. Adrian, welcome to the Staking Insider podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Mirko.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to dive into the conversation around Namada and staking. I think there's a lot to unpack around staking and intents as well. Before we dive right into it, I would love to maybe roll up your background a little bit. I know you started out running a professional validator and contributing to the Tezos ecosystem with Cryptium Labs, and then sold the Cryptium Labs to Chorus One, and on the side have already been developing, I think, the ideas around Anoma and Namada, which is a long time ago. Maybe you can walk us a little bit through the history and your background.
Yeah, it actually started prior to Cryptium Labs, I have to say. So my grad studies, I wrote my grad thesis on censorship-resistant e-voting on Ethereum. This was when 2016 or so, 2015, 2016. Really, there was nothing out there to build cool things on, so I ended up writing about the facility. This was also during the time of the Catalan independence referendum and the Arab Spring, right? And essentially, I figured, it'd be cool to build censorship-resistant voting solutions that that populations can use to coordinate themselves without sort of central authorities being able to stop this. Because I kind of figured, if 20% of a country want to go one route, they should be able to do this. And so this technology to me always had this appeal that the censorship-resistant possibility was always there, that you could actually do cool things with it. Through that, I actually came across Tenement, the paper, because I was doing a bunch of research for my grad thesis anyway. Messaged Jay on Slack in late December, I think, or maybe late November 2016. I was like, Cosmos looks cool. I like Tenement. Do you need help? I know how to code. And then I joined as a third core dev on Cosmos. And I built up the entire stack there. So we built Tendermint, now BFT, the SDK, Gaia, the Gaia IBC. Yeah, and this is really sort of how I got started in crypto. So it really started with Ethereum and Cosmos, which sort of very much matches also my philosophical approach. I'm not a sort of chain maxi. I think there will be hundreds of thousands of chains. I think it's and I'm not even necessarily sure that they will all be checkpointed into some base layer. I think there will just be thousands of sovereign systems, because this is currently how countries work. We have hundreds of sovereign systems that sort of figure out how to interoperate with each other, right? And yeah, out of this came then in the middle of maybe 2018 or so, we started one of the very first proof of stake validator companies. And people forget this, but in 2017, people thought proof of stake was nuts. It was very unclear. Two things were very unclear. It was very unclear whether proof of stake was going to be a thing, and it was very unclear whether PBFT, as in practical Byzantine fault-tolerant consensus, would work. And if you look at something like Cadena, for example, Cadena was sort of the bet that proof of stake would work, but that PBFT wouldn't work. So that you needed proof of stake plus a worker consensus. So we started one of the very first validator companies. This is also why I ended up in Switzerland, because we figured, let's put it all in the Swiss Alps. Historically, that's a good place to park lots of money. So I like the country. I moved here as a result. We set up everything in physical data centers here. And yeah, then we...
And that was even before all the proof of stake chains launched, right?
Yeah, this was...
Cosmos launched, and yeah.
There was nothing live actually when we racked up the servers. For the first 2 months or so, nothing happened. And then incidentally, Tezos beat everyone to the punch. And they actually managed to launch the first delegated proof of stake system first. No, so we set it all up, scaled the company to a ridiculous amount of assets under management. I think sort of peak market, we probably had something $5 billion or so. It was nuts, because there wasn't a lot of things around. I mean, it was us was coming out, Figment was around, Cosmos stations. Again, people thought we were nuts. The proof of stake was actually going to be a thing. I mean, in the beginning, it was all janky as fuck. I remember this from the Polkadot days. So you remember how Polkadot had this delegate nominated proof of stake, whatever, and no one else read their code. except us. And so like I figured out, people like you need to split your stake manually across many different nodes. And so at some point in Kusama and Polkadot, like I spun up 32 machines and we're running them all into like 30 or 40% of the network. Because everyone else was like, yeah, just delegate to my one key. And no one else figured out that like in the UI, you should like input up to 16 of your addresses and then like have the system figured out. And also that was cool. And I'm very happy that we actually ran everything very principally in Switzerland on physical hardware. We sold the company to Chorus One in the end. Honestly, I'm not an infrastructure guy. I like protocol engineering and development. Physical servers are like cool for 6 months. And after this, oh fuck, thing broke again. And then we also started building up a dev team called Metastate, which really sort of was just focused on core development, research engineering, specifically across 3 verticals like distributed systems, ZKPs, and compile. Did a bunch of work with the Tesla Foundation there and a couple of other things. So really build up sort of the protocol development backbone. And then, in the middle of 2020, Chris, Al, and I sat down and like, what the fuck are we doing here? Everyone's copying the same 3 Uniswap contracts to another chain. For some reason, this is supposed to be useful activity. And so we figured, what is fundamentally missing? The fundamental thing that was missing was users didn't have transaction, they had intents. This was very clear even in 2020, in my opinion. Like intent is just a much better abstraction than partial state transitions, rather than fully fledged transactions or fully balanced state transitions. And generally, this is what people have when they interact with these systems. So you need to have infrastructure for this. The other thing was you need some form of counterparty discovery. So like how do people talk to each other in a peer-to-peer fashion without having to relay this all via global consensus. The third thing was heterogeneous trust, as in there will be many of these systems, and how do all of these systems work together? How can I say like my intent is valid for A and B and C, but not D? Things like this. And then really the fourth thing was like, I figured if my parents were ever going to use this technology, we needed privacy guarantees, because they were never going to like, and like even like if nation states want to adopt this tech, we fundamentally need privacy guarantees, because currently like we're all just like donating our data to North Korea. It's not a good idea. Like on the premise of national defense or community defense, like you need good, strong privacy guarantees for your local community. Otherwise, these systems will not be anything more than just a toy example. Yeah, that's sort of, and out of this then came Namada, which is sort of the first project in the Anoma ecosystem that has a really strong community that focuses around privacy guarantees and like data protection, like playing around with that. And yeah, the community launched the thing. It's cool. They launched it at the end of the year. So we're now in phase 2, starting to, I think there's some discussion about starting to go to phase 3 and like injecting the proposal. So like, yeah, things are cool.
Yeah, it's wild. Actually going live now, like after so many years as well. If you started in 2020, but probably like all of these ideas already developed much, much earlier, if I hear that correctly.
Yes. So, I mean, this is like, technically, I think we started like the beginning of 2021, like full throttle. It was, I think what people like underestimate is there have been 2 step functions so far. There was a step function of 0 to Bitcoin. And then there was a step function of like Bitcoin to Ethereum. Because right now you can pretty much look at all existing systems and go, they kind of fit either into the Bitcoin bucket or the Ethereum bucket. And so, but like there's a clear difference between them. And I think like now we're approaching the 3rd step function, which is like intent-centric systems rather than VM-centric systems. And this is really like, yeah, things are difficult. And like Anoma is very principally designed. So like, but I'm happy also like Anoma, we don't need to talk too much about it here, but like, it's also coming this year. It's very exciting. It's going live, I think.
No, very exciting. Yeah, I was there. I was on the live stream you had when Namada went live in early December. And it was great, like seeing you, because you worked with Ava and Chris basically together and like for a very long time, right? Also, you even had Cryptium Labs together, and you're still building together. Yeah. This is fascinating to see. Yeah.
I know. No, that's cool. I mean, this is a nice thing. The industry is like, it's growing up to some extent, but to some other extent, like the same people keep like floating around. And it's really cool to see. I imagine this is how the Linux people feel. Now, like 40 years later, it's like the same 15 faces.
Yeah, no, it's reassuring for the industry, like teams actually building for the long term. And I think that's very exciting, especially in an industry where everything is kind of, very short-sighted. Like everyone is launching a token, pumping it up, and then leaving and doing something else. But you guys seem to really build for the long term. And the one thing that was also very fascinated about, you did this approach of like non-vesting of the tokens in Namada. I think this was announced in August last year, where basically, like no investors, no one of the team, like there's no vesting schedule, which is totally against or like different to what everyone else is doing in the industry. And personally, I think it's really amazing. I think it's a way to really build organic traction for products. I mean, this is also how Bitcoin was launched, right? Like there were no vesting or something like this. Because a little bit through the decision process there and the ideas behind it. Yeah.
So there are a number of things to this, which is, in the end, if the community would want to enforce some vesting schedule on sort of because like the foundation only really published the Genesis block and the community decided to run with it or not run with it, right? Like it was a fully decentralized launch, like in Cosmos. So there was a Genesis file, and then the validators decided whether they wanted to run it or whether they wanted to run it with these kind of parameters. So in the end, it's really, I think it's a community choice that we made as a community here, to that vesting is probably not, let me say, the smartest possible model. Because when you look at other things that currently do vesting, I don't think it does what people think it does. Where in a traditional, like when you think of like stock equity rewards in traditional like Facebook, vesting generally implies that it can be clawed back. It's not generally actually about the time. Like it's not about time locks. You may also have some time locks, but vesting generally applies to like, oh, you have to keep like doing the thing, otherwise we claw it back. And this is generally not how this works in crypto. In crypto, really, it's a time lock. And so what you see is that a lot of these chains launch, or a lot of these tokens launch with incredibly low float and high FTV, like because it offsets how people perceive the asset. So like essentially, like when you look at the curves, it always like it's down only, because people that want to get out can only get out slowly over time, or like they do some. Now all the hedge funds are running the carry trades effectively, where like they short the perps, and like they buy essentially at a discount in spot, and then they short the perps, and then they make the difference. But like none of this seems very much useful for community building. Or like actually the other model is they just OTC lock tokens, and generally everyone does this at the moment. So like vesting, it's like it appears on paper, but it doesn't actually fulfill any of the requirements, because people that still want to get out still can get out, generally speaking. And so
they get out by shorting the token, basically.
By shorting the token, yeah, and then just holding it, or by selling it OTC. And from a community perspective, like when you look at a lot of the launches in the last 3 years, they're terrible for the community, because like they start like this, and like it just goes closer and closer to zero.
It's very sad, and it's very hard to come back after that, right? Because it's all the sentiment and like the momentum is gone.
Because
like if you have a chart that looks
when
like
you
this.
when you think about this chart, right? Like it essentially just means people that were really excited about it early on just lost money. Like if you look at even some of the popular tokens, like Hyperliquid, for example, I think will end up being a good example of this. Like people that just bought in the first, I don't know, like 6 to 12 months are just going to be down. This is just like going to be the reality of it. So like your entire early community kind of gets slaughtered on this. And so it seemed much better that if people want to get out and like leave the community, they can. But that means that that they have to essentially sell the lowest possible price point, which means that someone that actually wants to get in from the community side can buy the low price point. So to me, this was always like, this is why I liked Ethereum, because like in Ethereum, we didn't have these like weird things that like massively distorted the market, where it made it this like weird insider game where a bunch of people just like try to OTC tokens. So yeah, this was sort of the fundamental reasoning that I think this is not what people like in terms of community health. This is terrible. The one interesting exception to this is actually airdrop farmers. Airdrop farmers want vesting for a very specific reason, which is they're generally the only people unlocked. So like when something like Celestia launches, the airdrop farmers are generally liquid. And so they are super incentivized to like have this like super skewed curves, because they're the only people that can like sell liquid spot. So as a result, you see like tons of activity on Twitter that's like, yeah, no, we should like have these like long vesting schedules and so on. But like for an actual core community, it's much better, I think. And we'll see how this experiment plays out with Namada, the Namada community. But I think overall, this is going to be much better in terms of actually like stable growth for a community over time.
Yeah. I mean, it gives the community, even after an airdrop and after like launching, still a way to participate at like at a fair market price, which is not pumped up artificially.
Yeah.
By not having like a fair market price discovery, basically. I'm
but
really excited for how
I
this
hope
plays
that
out.
more people do this. Like this would massively clean up everyone's like metrics about how the market actually works. Like it'd be very helpful. And I think this is also I'm hoping that Namada sets a good precedent and like more people can start adopting this model. And I've seen an uptick of this actually. I forgot the name of the project, but some other project is now also discussing this idea.
I mean, it creates a very distorted picture of the actual market conditions, right? If you see a very high FTV, but actually like it's only very high FTV, then it's trading OTC for like a fraction of that basically.
Actually,
And
best
people
example
like
is
are lured into buying the token on spot for like 10x of the OTC price.
Like if you look at movement, for example, ridiculous setup. Like it's trading in like at 50% to spot or something in the OTC market, I think. So yeah, I hope we can get rid of this like pretty like distorting effects of this.
Yeah. No, I think this is great, and I love that you set a precedent there. And yeah, I mean, there's more things that I'm excited about for Namada. You also obviously incorporate a lot of like staking ideas, I think. Obviously, we're on the Staking Insider podcast, so we'd love to dive a little bit into like the staking ideas. You also have a staking mechanism that ties in with the shielded set. Maybe you can explain the shielded set a little bit. I guess you like there's a way for anyone to make blockchain transactions on any token private by funneling through Namada, right? And then there's a staking mechanism that kind of backs this up, or incentivize the pool on Namada of any token, right?
Yeah, let's start maybe with like rough overview. What does Namada do? I mean, Namada has a bunch of good data protection guarantees, as in you can like put some information, and this information may very well represent something like an ETH or a bit. Like this is in the end all just data. You can put this into the shielded set, and then you can retrieve this data later on from the shielded set again. It also comes, it's fully asset agnostic, as in like Namada doesn't care whether it's like an ETH or an Atom or an Osmo. Anything that's like IBC compatible at the moment can flow into this. And theoretically, just like everything that you can bridge into this system can also flow into Namada and back out. As it's just like whatever other distributed system wants to talk to Namada can talk to Namada. I have to say, please don't build your own interop standard, just use IBC, it's well specified. And you'd save us all a lot of headaches if we stop reinventing new protocols to solve exactly the same thing. And
in the beginning, it will probably be Cosmos chains and Cosmos tokens then utilizing Namada.
Like, the nice thing is now there's also starting to be IBC adapters on Ethereum. So I think especially with the ZK Lite clients, is becoming a lot more feasible. So I think in the next 6 months or so, we'll actually see a lot of work going into, so just like most of the ecosystems go to adopt IBC. I'm pretty bullish on this actually. Then Namada also has a bunch of public goods funding mechanisms and also retroactive public goods funding mechanisms. It has a very novel steward concept, where essentially there can be a number of stewards elected by Namada governance, and then these stewards get a steady stream of inflationary rewards so that they can sort of like point to wherever they want. And whenever governance doesn't feel okay with this anymore, they can remove the stewards. So rather than having to funnel everything essentially via public referendum, you can also elect a couple of stewards that can then do things ad hoc and only sort of like need to be ratified every couple of months.
What do they do exactly, the stewards?
They essentially just receive a stream of the inflation that's reserved for governance. So like think of this, like there's some stream that is spendable by like the treasury essentially by a public governance vote, and then there's some stream that can be spent by the stewards. And so if you, for example, have 3 stewards, then they're elected by governance and by the community, those 3 stewards then share that stream for the stewards. And they can then decide to point their part of the NAM rewards to whatever they want. They can fund block explorers, they can find an Arctic exploration, which I'd find cool. They could fund some open source drone software, which I'd also find very cool. They're not limited, and it's a much more flexible process. Like it's much more experimental. Where like if you're interested in this kind of stuff, like please apply as a steward on Namada and just run for it. Because I think this is going to try to fix a lot of the problems we see with the governance systems, where they first discuss an idea to death, and then they wonder why nothing happens. And this generally happens in like public referendums. And I'm pretty curious to see what happens if you sort of have like a more predictable way to spend inflationary rewards.
So it's a way to decentralize a foundation funding like grant system.
Yes,
basically.
The system should be Namada is fully self-sufficient, essentially. It shouldn't have to rely on any other entity. Right, but then coming to staking. So Chris wrote a large part of the original Cosmos SDK staking modules, right, that everyone is currently running. And I remember the discussions back in the day were like, oh, it'd be cool to put in some extra things, but like we didn't have time. And so Namada, we did all those things. So there's like incredibly granular accounting, but the biggest thing, there's cubic proof of stake, cubic slashing. And this essentially means the larger you are as a validator, the larger your slashing percentage becomes. And this is not just per validator, it's also correlated slashing. So if a number of validators get slashed within the slashing window, they are counted as a correlated slash. And this is really just there to incentivize people to run disjoint hardware and to like run disjoint risks, essentially. Because if all of you get slashed at the same time, the slashing percentage goes up exponentially. So like as a result, you should really be careful to not delegate all to the same validator. It is way riskier in Namada than it is in most other systems. The other thing is, in Namada, so the inflationary rewards are as small as possible, especially on proof of stake. As in most systems pay like a fixed percentage, essentially. Like they say like, well, we'll pay roughly, call it 10% or so. In Namada, for example, like currently the target ratio for asset staked is 55%. I think with the last governance proposal, it was originally 40, I think, in the Genesis block. And then the fire governance, it was raised to 55. Because currently like 48% or so is staked. It's very cool. But
in Cosmos, it's like still 70%, right?
Yeah.
Or
I don't think everything should be staked in proof of stake, because there's this other thing that Shielded said that also wants to have some staking love. But it's essentially like with the P controls, it also means that the rewards rate goes down. So like once you hit the staking ratio, it starts trending towards 0, which is also very different. Like, it just makes sure that you don't overpay for the security, essentially. Yeah, and then maybe the third thing is the shielded set rewards. So in the shielded set, one big problem with bootstrapping a shielded set is that, like, if you're the only person in the shielded set, you get very little benefits. Like if I'm moving like 1 ETH in and 1 ETH out, I get very little benefits. Like I get benefits from being able to, or my parents kind of like get benefits of like their pharmacy payments aren't obvious to the rest of the world. Like all the other people in the village also use the same technology, and then their transaction is just one of many transactions. And this,
so it's like the more funds are in the set, the more privacy does it basically facilitate for the entity.
yes, broadly speaking, it's a little bit of a like complex calculation on like, it's not an exact science either. It's like a little bit on like how many types of assets, how much turnover is there, and then also what are the total amounts. So it's a little bit of everything. And shielded set rewards are a completely new circuit that didn't exist until like it was launched with them, and that no one else has deployed. And essentially it allows you to like governance to say, well, we'd like to hold, I don't know, 1,000 ETH or like 1 million Atom in the shielded set. And if you put in some Atom, then you earn some amount of NAM rewards from the system itself, because like you are contributing towards the privacy guarantees of the overall shielded. And this is very novel. This hasn't existed anywhere yet before. And so I'm very excited to see how that plays out. And so I also expect some amount of NAM to flow into this. And actually, if you...
Sounds like a restaking mechanism that pays out actual rewards.
Yes, except that it's like not this like leveraged security model. This is kind of like restaking is kind of scary in my opinion, because it really reminds me of collateral, like CDOs, collateral debt obligations that collapse the housing market, because like you leverage another like slashing potential on top of it. Whereas in Namada, it's more like if you hold ETH anyway and you just want to like earn some NAM rewards, you can just put them into a shielded set and just hold them there.
And there's no slashing risk then?
There's no slashing risk, no. Yeah. I mean, there's always technology risk. And so like Namada, for example, also starts with IBC rate limits and IBC like max limits. So you can't move unlimited amounts of funds into Namada and out of Namada instantly. We saw this blow up a bunch of times. But yeah, there's no slashing risk there. You are not delegating to a validator, you're delegating essentially to the system itself.
Oh, it's fascinating.
Also, if you want to get involved there, maybe you can drop this later in the show notes. There's a cool governance proposal.
Yeah, we'll put it in the description.
Like on the forum. The forum is actually very active. So if you want to get involved in like which assets and so on, and like what reward rates, the community is pretty active on the forum, currently discussing potential parameters for the next proposal.
Yeah. I mean, this is a very attractive staking opportunity, so to say, for like any token. But I guess it's limited. It's capped then at like whatever, like 1,000 ETH, you say, or something like this.
Because I mean, there's like some asymptotic rewards. I mean, like And it's not entirely clear on like where sort of the max is, but like if you have if you have 10 million Bitcoin in there, like the extra million, and then you like incentivizing an extra million Bitcoin, so like an extra going from 10 to 11 million Bitcoin probably doesn't move the needle. So like there's this leveling off of the utility to the system. So I think only like the first couple of assets are going to be incentivized in this way.
Yeah.
The other really cool thing about the
scale up as the will that scale up as the volume scales for the privacy transactions, or it's not really necessary if you have this threshold?
It needs to be somewhat like it is better if like the biggest transaction individually is like not a large majority of the assets in the set. So I think like if you only have like 1,000 euros in the set or like 1,000 CHF, it'd be better that not transactions are like 900 CHF.
Makes sense.
Oh, the other thing is, the nice thing is the shielded set can also use the staked assets. So like a lot of the liquid staked tokens can just be used instead of the original tokens. So like you get like essentially like you can still accrue the staking yield if you want, if your staking protocol gives you a staked token back.
Oh, wait. So like the assets in the shielded set can also be staked. So
this is my personal opinion. I think the community, we should incentivize staked ETH instead of normal ETH. And so like Namada doesn't do anything to stake assets. It's more like it can also incentivize staked asset types.
That makes sense. And the most obvious choice would then be liquid staking tokens, like SDEs.
Staked Atoms, staked Osmo, staked TIA.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, this sounds really great. Then you get double rewards, staking and shielded set rewards. No, really excited. Like one question actually on the cubic slashing. I guess you mentioned that there's like correlated slashing risks. So it would also, I guess, and cubic slashing obviously, like it would incentivize like validator, staking provider entities to also run multiple or like kind of hardware in different regions.
Yes.
And then really maybe run multiple validators as well, right?
Multiple validators doesn't really fix your problem. So like you need to have validators that are like, if you want to run, like let's say I'm Cryptium Labs or Chorus One or some like validator, right? If I can operationally run two validators that are decorrelated from each other because like it's a completely separate team running it with separate keys in a separate location, that makes sense. If you're like the same dude just goes, here's validator 1 and validator 2, and they have the same SSH keys kind of thing, that doesn't really help.
It would have to be like fully distinct infrastructure, architecture, and like setup and so on. Yeah. All right. Cool. That's interesting. And you have a thriving validator ecosystem. I think 160 validators on the network already.
160? Wait, let me check.
We did the integration on staking rules.
186 now.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah. It's growing.
Yeah. No, and 40% is staked right now. This is actually the other cool thing about Namada. A lot of the other, like when you look at a lot of the other ecosystems, like there's someone like that runs a bunch of critical infrastructure, right? And the wallet is hosted by one of the core teams or something like this. In Namada, I don't know. I run no infrastructure. There's like 186 validators that run the network. They run all the wallets, I think. They run the indexing services. They run the block explorers. There's like 6 block explorers right now. There's like 4 different wallets. It's very cool. It's like an actual decentralized ecosystem. This is a little bit like, I missed this from back in the 2017. Like we actually built decentralized tech. And then like in 2020, 2021, everyone just went like, you know what? It's way easier to call the roll up and run it on a centralized server. And like everything just looks super smooth as a result. But like it's all just running out of a central server out of Tokyo. And so with Namada, we just like went the full 9 yards and just like, it's just, everything is run by the community. There's no centralized infrastructure. The entire thing, it was a fully decentralized launch. It's very cool as a result.
So you have this Namadillo, the staking interface, right? And then I guess it's hosted by over 20 different times from different staking providers.
Yeah, there's a bunch of open source code. Some of them have started modifying it now. So like there's like this example of what a staking interface could look like, but they can also start modifying it. It's very cool.
Then I would love to like take a little bit of a detour into like intents. I guess this is also like a very big idea of Anoma and Namada as well. So maybe you can give, for everyone listening, like a quick intro into intents itself, and then also like how are intents basically implemented in Anoma and Namada. Yeah, like what's your perspective on intents in general? we can maybe also look into the future a little bit of the whole blockchain space, and also what does it do for AI and so on.
The easiest way to think of an intent is like when you go to a store and you go like, I'd like to buy some milk. That's your intent. And you only have like half of the trade, right? Like you have the idea that you want some milk and that you're willing to give some money in exchange. And the store provides the other side of the trade, essentially. It provides you milk in exchange for money. So in the physical world, this makes a lot of sense. And this is why I saw like the transaction model kind of works in the Bitcoin world, in the traditional world, but the idea was like you go to a store, you pay in Bitcoin, you get some milk back. Really, in the digital world, it's all about partial state transitions. Because, for example, I would like to trade some ETH for Bitcoin. I don't know who else has Bitcoin for ETH, like who wants to take the inverse. I don't know where to find them necessarily. I just want to be able to describe, I have some ETH and I'd like some Bitcoin if and only if like the price is above this X and the weather in Paris is nice. And so this is generally what intents map. They're partial state transitions. The nice thing is with Anoma, they're fully generalized. As Anoma doesn't know what an asset or what a price is, it just knows there's some storage keys being exchanged. So this means you can write these very complex intents like, I would like to trade some A for B if the weather is nice in Bangkok, and if it's bad, I need this extra signature from this multi-sig to imply that Donald Trump bought a bunch of meme coins on Solana, and only then am I willing to like execute this trade. So you can like make these incredibly like complex and like composable conditionals. Because the other nice thing is with Anoma, you get composable solving. So you get this idea that if you have an intent from A to B and I have an intent from B to C, a solver can come along and go, this collapses into A to C. And generally here, like, intents really just like abstract some amount of compute, right? Because like a solver needs to do some compute to figure out that like this intent from A to B and B to C, they're compatible, and like, how do you compute them? And so as a result, they also map super well into AI agents and ZK proofs and so on, which I can come back to in a sec. But this is essentially what Anoma does. It's all about intents. It's the only generalized intents protocol at the moment. It gives you a bunch of advantages from like, you don't have to run centralized infrastructure to you can actually use this to express ZK proofs really elegantly, where you don't, because like ZK proofs push data to the edges of the network, so to end user devices. So how do you make statements over like data on my phone? And an intent is the answer. The other really cool example is actually like a multi-sig is also just an intent-centric application. Because when you think of, so intents also help with like, they also represent something like a multi-sig. We have 3 out of 3 multi-sig, right? Like traditionally what happens if you do this with a Gnosis safe right now is that like I sign the first 1 out of 3, then upload to a central server. Second person signs the next 2 out of 3, and then you sign the third 3 out of 3. And then the last person sort of pulls all these partial state transitions from the server and then publishes this somewhere. And so with Anoma, you just get this as a fully generalized architecture that works in a heterogeneous trust model that encompasses privacy guarantees. And like you get a tremendous amount of efficiency gain because, for example, you just get like rollups for free because a rollup is literally just like a bunch of partial state transitions all like collapsed and then put into settle somewhere. The nice thing is this also works super well both the ZKPs as well as AI agents, because like it is an intent allows you to describe a desire. It doesn't, because when you think of what a transaction does, a transaction allows you to describe a specific thing that updates the database on the other side, right? Like when you send a transaction to Ethereum, you affect a global state change. But with an intent, you can say, I have this desire, and maybe this is possible or it's not possible. Anyone that figures this out, I'll pay some amount of money to. And this is why this is the correct
like
abstraction.
Yeah.
Essentially, yes. Like an intent can even say like, I'm willing to pay, because like simple intents say things like, I'd like to trade ETH for Bitcoin. The fees on that are going to be tiny, right? Because the liquid market. But my intent could also say like, get me a frog from the rainforest, deliverable in Geneva airport kind of thing. And I probably have to pay thousands of dollars for this because someone has to like fly to the Amazon, like get me the poisonous frog and fly it back to Geneva. But like, this is all expressible here. And this is why you also start seeing the like move that everyone is starting to think about intents. But it's a fundamentally new architecture. It's kind of like currently we're living in this world where like, yes, we'd like to have some tokens, and like now we're building some colored coin stuff on Bitcoin. And so like everyone is like trying to build like some funky intent infrastructure. But really you need generalized intent infrastructure for generalized intents that can be cross-chain, that can be in this heterogeneous trust environment where you have an entire P2P stack where like my phone is also just a mini blockchain that issues some intents sometimes to other blockchains, like it represents my like local state quite well. And so this is everything that Anoma does.
And I guess the idea with AI agents is because AI agents usually give them a goal and then they try to achieve it through like, different kind of chained LLM prompts and on-chain transactions and so on. But you could also give them intents or tasks that are not achievable just from pure on-chain transactions, right? I guess that's where it gets interesting.
Yes. It allows see if it's possible. Like see if you can find me someone that's willing, that has this other thing, right? Like imagine. Like, don't think about this in liquid crypto sense. Think about this in like, I would like to buy a car at this price point. And now AI agent, go. See if you can find me, and very possible because there are like many separate marketplaces all over the place. And maybe one of them has it, right? But then the AI agent can immediately take the intent and immediately execute this. So you can deliver you the end result. Or you can go back to you and go like, I found these 3 options, which ones do you want to pick? It just makes us much more flexible. I have to say that I think it's still a little bit away that AI agents will sort of like do this generalized solving because it's difficult. Like it's computationally expensive. I think AI agents in the beginning will very much be just like running locally on your phone and like processing like natural language into intents that you then like look at and go like, yes, this is what I meant, and then you sign it, and then you just like have this executed directly on chain. I think we're probably still a couple of years away from me just like sending intents to AI agents where the AI agents act as solvers. I think that we'll see how efficient they can be at this.
No, that's very interesting. I guess, it makes sense that it's just like very basic and digital in the beginning, but I want to like going very long into the future. How would these kind of, if we connect it to the physical world, how would it actually resolve? How would it be possible to actually prove that the agent bought me this car at this price point now, or like brought me the frog from the rainforest?
Yeah. So physical world, right? Frogs, difficult. Let's think cars. My suspicion is there will be hundreds of thousands of blockchains, and essentially, like they will be like, if I'm creating an asset, I'm going to run this on a sovereign system. This may not necessarily be an open source, like this may not be an open right system, as in like this may not be a public chain. But imagine that like Volkswagen tracks all their cars on some like enterprise chain, which I'm actually okay with. But you can send a car from the Volkswagen chain, like when you buy a car, you decide, I would like to store this on global Ethereum. So you essentially say, Volkswagen, sell me a car, I'll give you some, I don't know, euro, whatever. And then they send you back a car that is then secure, like the title to this car is secured on either global Ethereum or like your local government chain. And this is the way this will work. Like we'll just make a lot of these systems much more traceable. Like not traceable in the sense of like full transparency, but more like they're just going to be, it's just going to be a better accounting system rather than carrying pieces of paper around. And like I even imagine this like this to like work for currencies too. Like Switzerland is never going to issue the CHF, like the CHF on Ethereum. They will never give up monetary sovereignty. They'd be out of their mind to do this, right? But what they can ostensibly do is they issue them on like a Swiss chain run by 26 different validators, each owned by one of the cantons. And now we can just like, as long as they speak roughly the same protocol, we can start leveraging these assets and they're like, oh, cool. I can now I can like move some digital CHF from that chain to like my local chain over here on my phone. And then when I want to do a trade on Uniswap, I can move some of those assets to Uniswap and then like issue to Ethereum and then issue an intent there. And like intents will just make this all very easy because you can say things like, I currently have some ETH on Ethereum and I'd like to hold some Bitcoin on Solana, just make it happen. And in the end, you just check like Anoma as the operating system just like ensures that there's consistency in this distributed environment.
And I also like, I mean, one thing that I've always been excited about around staking is like that you can basically create decentralized labor markets where you like, let's say someone is promising that they do a certain type of work, they can stake on it and then earn rewards for it if they actually do the work. Similar like with validation, right? So I guess this is the angle where staking could then be like a huge driver for like making sure that the intents that you publish will actually get done if you have an AI agent stake on this intent, for example.
Yes, you can do really clever things, like where you can even do things like free bandwidth for transaction. As like one very practical example, like I stake to my validator or to my node operator, and as a result, that node operator provides me like some quality of service guarantees, maybe 10 free transactions a month and things like this. And if they violate this, then they're slashable. So like you can do all these like clever tricks here where you can like intermesh economic incentives with very ad hoc desires that people may have. It's going to be pretty exciting, I think, actually. I don't know if people like, if you haven't read the Endless Game books. To me, the two books that describe crypto really well is like The Diamond Age Princess and the Cryptonomicon from Neil Stevenson and Endless Game. Because they live in this multi-planetary society of like, where like globally this is a distributed operating system that you can like move through.
Yeah, we'll check this out. Cool. Yeah, this is very exciting. I guess you're really like, I mean, you drive forward so many innovations, and also I love how you guys have like incorporate like all these staking, like a lot of staking ideas in Namada and Anoma. So
yeah, we're going to probably just like intent-based staking. I think is going to be cool too. Instead of having to settle everything on the spot in consensus, you can aggregate a bunch of options. So like you can aggregate this idea like I'm willing to stake to these like 15 different validators if they fulfill certain conditions. And then we all pool our intents. And like we all just submit intents and they're not settled in global consensus, so they're essentially free for us. And then some solver sort of goes, what does the validator set actually look like now? Given that everyone has these like very granular preferences over, for example, decentralization, like I never want to stake to a validator larger than 5%. And so like you take hundreds of thousands of these intents together and you actually get a very fair representation of like what everyone's ideal validator set is. And you can run it this way then. So you can like imagine this kind of epoch-based approach where like everyone submits intents for like a day to like express their preferences. Then we run then a bunch of solvers compete to find like the most optimal way to do this. And then you submit this solution on chain, and this like then runs a validator set for the next epoch. Yeah, this is intent-based staking in a nutshell, kind of.
that's
like
amazing.
one broad idea.
And then the AI agent will spin up their own validator according to the parameters that you set. And then it actually incentivizes like real decentralization if we can set like certain standards, right? Like I only delegate with you.
You can
if
get like
do
automatic
not,
like rebalancing done where you go like, I never want to delegate to anyone that's like larger than 5%. And like next time, because intents can live forever essentially, like intents don't have to expire. So like you can also think of them as like permanent preference expression unless you make them expire. So you can do like, please redelegate to the next validator if my current validator is becoming too large. Things like this.
Yeah, I feel like we could continue forever like on these topics. There's really a lot to unpack. I hope maybe we can like continue also to have you on at the Staking Summit this year to talk more about staking and intents. I think it's a fascinating topic. Yeah, I'm very bullish on
this
it.
can be the intro, and like we can chunk it down to like separate episodes for things now.
Yeah, 100%. I think there's more to come, and maybe we can like even go deeper into staking and intents as you develop on the protocol as well. I'm very excited for everything that's coming, and yeah, thank you, Adrian, for being very generous with your time today and all the amazing insights.
Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome, cool. Thank you very much.